I've done a couple videos now where I talk about monopods, and in the second stage of my learning about them, I hit upon a fallacy of sorts in my own head when I made a very strange remark to myself, which was, the other shoe has dropped. I'd found out a little bit more about monopods. I initially thought they were a stick that you put your camera on that sounds like the name of a space alien. Then I found out that there are fantastical creatures in literature called monopods that dating back to 400 BC at least, and that these had been attributed by Credo Mutwa as precursors of alien invasion. So then there really were, presumably, according to him, space aliens called monopods, and at this point I thought the other shoe was dropped, meaning in my head that I had come to the second stage of understanding the meanings of the word and the creatures. But it's a very strange way of saying that understanding, because what the other shoe dropping is supposed to mean the culmination of an inevitable process, usually with a negative outcome. This can't happen with a monopod. The idea is that someone has gotten up into the room above you in a hotel, say, and you hear one of their shoes drop to the floor, and you know that they're going to take off the other shoe and let it drop to the floor as well. But with a monopod, they don't even wear shoes. One of the pictures that I saw looked like this. So there is this monopod using his foot as shelter from the sun to keep it like a parasol. And it was a very large foot, but it was bare. He didn't wear any shoes on it. Not only then does a monopod not wear shoes, but even if he did wear shoes, he wouldn't wear two of them because he's got only one foot. So there's this idea that uncovering knowledge, learning about something, isn't an inevitable process. It's not something where the other shoe drops. And not only that, it's something you have to work at or just be exposed to, and you don't know when you're going to find something out that allows you to learn more about the initial topic. In this case, it was relating to Quetzalcoatl, the Ouroboros, and so on, because I found out in the third stage of learning about monopods that the symbol of the monopod god, according to Credo Mutwa, is the Ankh, and that was signed as a signature next to a crop circle which depicted Quetzalcoatl, or the Ouroboros, or the headdress of Quetzalcoatl. There are several different versions of these crop circles that are supposed to be attributed to Quetzalcoatl. And in this stage of having to be open to more information about a topic and not just deciding after learning things in one stage or two stages that you always have to be open to a third or more stages of learning about the meaning of the thing, that has allowed me to look at the ways that people perceive The Shining and see what meanings I think they are missing or haven't stated in full. These have to do with things like monopods, the Ouroboros, and alchemy, and so on. Now, there is an actual depiction of the Ouroboros in the Shining movie when the boy Danny looks around and sees the two girls in blue standing in a doorway, and behind them there's a poster with the Ouroboros on it. And the major commentators that I've seen or heard the videos of on YouTube haven't mentioned the connection of the Ouroboros to the overall story, which I think should be very prominent, actually, because it's a story about people trapped in the cycle of reincarnation, or at least doing the same thing over and over. It's very central to the story. The Overlook Hotel means doing something over and over, because if you say its name over and over, overlook, 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 over, it gives you two opposite meanings. First, to examine something carefully, to look over it, and to examine it and not see its true significance, which is to overlook it. So overlooking is about repeatedly learning and unlearning, which I've found is what happens in the reincarnative cycle, but it's also what's happened in our culture with the meaning of the term monopod, because it's been alternately discovered and covered up again. So there's this cycle going on that you have to understand a little bit about in order to unlock the meaning of The Shining as I see it. There's a lot of alchemical symbolism in The Shining, which I haven't heard mentioned explicitly, and that has to do with Gnostic and alchemical ideas about being trapped in a cycle from which you want to escape, and having, in Gnostic terms, a certain contempt for the material world, wanting to live a purely spiritual existence. This is something that Jack tries to pursue in the course of trying to write his novel, and which you can see the characters do more as the movie progresses, because they become increasingly separated from natural functions and natural cycles, particularly things having to do with digestion. The greatest terrors of the film, or some of them anyway, have to do with being incited to violence or trying to carry it out in the room that has the toilet, in the bathroom. First, Jack comes upon the naked woman who ages while he's kissing her, and avoiding aging is a major anxiety and a major thing that Jack wants to deal with. When she comes out of the tub, walking much like the woman in Eyes Wide Shut, later on will walk, and when she comes up to kiss him. So that's a moment of horror when he feels that she's starting to age, and turns into a rotting, walking corpse almost. So then he goes to talk to Grady in the washroom of the gold room, and this is highly alchemically symbolic, because in making the Philosopher's Stone there are several color shifts that the material you're dealing with goes through as it's refined, and the primary ones, according to at least one scheme, are black, white, and red. And these colors figure very prominently in the room where all the rich, well-dressed black and white and red-dressed people hang out, and also particularly in the washroom when Jack talks to Grady, where you especially see white and red highlighted. The Philosopher's Stone, when it's completed, after going through either 3 or 4 stages, depending on which version you talk about, sometimes there's a yellow stage, acquires the ability, among other things, to transmute base metals into gold. So that would be how you'd get the gold room. So it would symbolize spiritual advancement, but the means of spiritual advancement discussed are destructive. There are other people who have to die. There are outsiders who can't be brought in. There's a certain sense of isolation that has to be maintained. And within this is the horror of being in the material world, of having to digest your mundane food, and having to deal with what happens when it comes out. They're in the washroom when this is discussed. And then when Jack goes to carry out the murders of his son and wife, who might disrupt the world that he's seen in the gold ballroom, he carries out this murder by trying to enter the John. And when he tries to break into the John, the slang expression for the bathroom where the toilet is in English, he says, "Here's Johnny." So there's another potential meaning in that he's frantically trying to get to the room, even though he's repulsed by the idea of having to use toilet paper. So in my last video, when people asked me to talk more about The Shining, they weren't seeing that I'd partially done a meaning opposite of that of The Shining, where there's an abundance of toilet paper surrounding me, rather than a scarcity, and a soft surface rather than a hard surface. So Jack breaks in to attack his wife, and he's stopped by her by stabbing. But he has been driven to this extreme by a form of starvation, which is not immediately apparent and which can be hidden by some of the other analyses I have seen. They talk about the Donner Party, the group of settlers who were driven to cannibalism. And this is a foreshadowing of what will happen with Jack and his family, and that they're driven to cannibalism as well. But in the midst of plenty, in a place where there's so much food that they could eat a different dish every night for a year and not even start. on all the diversity of food available for them to eat. So it's not physical starvation that's the threat. It is spiritual, and particularly, I think in Jack's case, creative starvation. All the analyses I've seen say that Wendy is doing everything possible to support Jack, and in material terms she is. She's doing the work of keeping the hotel maintained. She's managing the boiler. She cooks for him. She brings him breakfast in bed at one point before he goes into his spiral of madness and evil trying to write his novel. But there's one thing she doesn't do with him, and that's what she discovers when she reads his abortive attempt to create a manuscript, which says all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Wendy does not play with Jack. She's almost like a replacement mother figure, like Wendy is to Peter Pan in that story. And that he's someone who doesn't want to grow up or wants to stay young, and he's looking for the means of doing it in part. But she is not a good partner to him as a creator because she does not play with him. And play is very important when you're trying to come up with ideas, when you're trying to brainstorm. That is what Jack does when he apparently treats the native art or the Apache or Navajo art on the wall with such contempt when he's throwing a ball at it repeatedly. Bouncing ideas off someone, throwing a ball around, is what you do when you're trying to come up with something to start a story. And this is what Wendy does not provide to Jack, even though it's abundantly clear that she is capable of doing so. It's almost like a form of creative infidelity, in that she plays with everybody except Jack. When they go on the initial tour of the hotel, she's enjoyed and impressed and comments upon the art, the Navajo and Apache art on the walls. She starts coming up with the beginnings of a story when she's with the chef, Halloran, I think his name is. And she says, this place is like a maze. You'd have to leave breadcrumbs to find your way through it. This is very important later on, in that, of course, a maze becomes important to the plot. But the retreat into madness and evil is accompanied by the absence of eating, even though she tries to force Jack to eat in a way at one point by locking him into the storeroom where all the dry goods are kept. She plays, she runs into the maze and runs around doing a mock chase with Danny. She watches TV with Danny. She does all sorts of creatively connected things. She brainstorms, she imagines, she contemplates, she talks about, and she conducts one half of the classic American form of relatively non-violent play. She is one half of the national pastime. She holds the bat. Jack throws the ball, but they never do both together. Baseball is something that combines the elements of the frontier and the homeland, America the Beautiful. Theoretically, the boundaries of baseball are unlimited, almost infinite. A ball can go as far as you want it to and not violate the rules of the game. In fact, the farther it goes, the better. But your ultimate objective is to return home and have a home. Part of the idea of having a home is having other people to play the game with you. And that is, of course, what the symbolism of Jack coming after Wendy while she's holding a bat shows. It's the absence of home and the absence of someone to share a common non-violent pursuit with. The exchange that they have in the bat scene can be thought of not only as a discussion of how to take care of the hotel, but a discussion of the problems of someone who has signed a contract not only to take care of the hotel, but to deliver a finished novel in the process of doing so. He talks about how she doesn't think. And thought is what he needs. He needs to interact bounce ideas off people and come up with a story in time for the spring deadline, as if he's going to deliver it to a publisher. And when he talks about his obligations and how she doesn't, have any ideas of her own or has never thought of anything, that's what is making him violent, and that's what gives him this creepy I'm just having fun aura to his poor performance, because he is looking to have fun, and Wendy is withholding her capacity to make fun and generate it with him, from him. There is a prejudice which is hidden under the level of the initial prejudice. A lot of people have talked about this being about the oppression of the Native or pre-Columbian American people. But the Donner Party, who the movie is very much based on, symbolically, starved to death because their cattle were either stolen or killed by Paiutes before they reached the final pass. So they lost a huge chunk of their food supply just as winter was about to close in. And that's partly why they had to resort to eating each other. So although they were part of the colonial push westward, in that particular instance, they lost their encounters with the people who'd been living there before them, and that left them vulnerable. So there's a sense, to me at least, that the failure of imagination in providing food for the soul, so on, so to speak, predated the arrival of the Europeans. But the prejudice of the Europeans is concealed. There are layers of it, like not looking for the other foot, so to speak. In Grady and Jack's conversation in the prominently white, red, and a little bit black washroom of the gold room, the template for spiritual improvement and advancement to a higher plane, Grady expresses contempt for Halloran, the chief chef, chief and chef being almost the same word, so there's a conflation of black people and pre-Columbian Native American people. He expresses his contempt not only because of Halloran's skin color, but because of his profession, because he is a cook, a preparer of food, someone who takes care of people's fundamental biological needs. And what apparently is sought by Jack and by the other people in the party, in the gold room, is an escape from the material world of physical needs. This is part, I think, or related to the philosophy of Gnosticism, which seeks release from the material world because it's believed by Gnostics that it is essentially the creation of an evil deity. So pure spirituality is the goal, and this is the goal of the refinement of the spirit symbolized by the alchemical process. Getting away from the cycle of reincarnation and being in the coils of the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail. This escape comes for only a few people. Some people can attain enlightenment and have a divine spark and can move beyond their initial human limitations to get back in contact with the distant deity outside the realm of the world we're in, outside the material world. But only some people can do this. Not everyone can do it. Some are locked in the material cycle and cannot move beyond it, no matter what knowledge they get. And that, I think, is the prejudice that lies beneath the apparent racism of Grady. He's not just saying that people who are involved in preparing and eating food and the mundane details of taking care of your body in everyday life are just inferior because of their skin color or their connection to the earth. Well, they are inferior because of their connection to the earth. That's what it boils down to. It's people involved in everyday eating and digestion and other things, including in this case perhaps marital relations, because that's another way Wendy never plays with Jack, are inferior. They are carnal rather than spiritual, and a lower class because of that. Now, Jack says he wishes he could stay in the Overlook forever, but that apparently is something of a curse, judging by the way the other people in the hotel act. And the nearby ski resort is called Sidewinder. Once again, a serpentine reference and a possible reference connection to the Ouroboros. The Navajo have their own version of Quetzalcoatl, who's connected to the Ouroboros. It's called Big Snake, and that one is also some depicted, as far as I could tell, sometimes with feathers. So cannibalism is a major theme, and the one who tries to break the cannibalistic cycle is the one who supplies the food, Halloran. But Jack is still in a way devouring himself, because he is he's projecting images into people's mind as a writer, as a maker of entertainment. And the spookiness of the movie comes in part from the depiction of things that we take for granted in everyday entertainment, such as cartoons and Johnny Carson and so on, of these things as somewhat sinister and deadly in a way, because they're absent of any spiritual value. And they're not so much horrible in and of themselves, but they're deadly for what they don't provide, for the absence of what they can provide, much like Wendy, when she's with Jack, behaves. So that's some of the stuff I found in The Shining. Shining itself could be, in a way, a reference to what people who are trying to complete the alchemical spiritual transformation are trying to achieve, because they want to get back to the source, which they identify as the light. Or if they want to make gold, gold is lustrous and shines as well. So part of it is the idea that you can obtain by force things from other people that will allow you to make this transition. But as I've found in a book at least, called The Red Lion, people who attempt to undergo the alchemical transformation by killing and taking what they want from other people just put themselves back in the same murderous cycle again. Which brings us finally to the question of why Stephen King chose an actor with the same first name as the character the actor was picked to portray, and why he apparently drew inferences between the life of the author and the life of the character. The idea, as I see it, is that what you imagine makes a difference in your world, and if you can't imagine non-killing means of making yourself famous and moving up the ladder, then it's a self-defeating process to write that way.